Last House on the Block by Sammy Zart. Chapter 7, Humility in Action. Chapter 7, Step 7 of AA says, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. By the time I had finished Step 6, prayer was no longer just something I did. It was something I needed. Before I took any action, I prayed. I had to come to understand that on my own, I was powerless. But with God, real change was possible. This step wasn't about me fixing myself. If I could have removed my own shortcomings, I wouldn't have needed God in the first place. Step 7 required something deeper than just willingness. It required humility. I had to admit that I couldn't remove my defects of character, no matter how much I wanted to. Only God could do that. And so I did what the step asked. I humbly asked him to remove them. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no flashes of lightning or sudden transformations. But something shifted in me. I had spent my whole life trying to control everything. My drinking, my relationships, my emotions. Now I was finally handing it over. The big book tells us to pray, to say a simple prayer. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me the strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. I meant those words. This step showed me that humility wasn't about shame or weakness. It was about recognizing that true strength comes from surrender. It wasn't just asking God to remove my shortcomings for my own sake. I was asking God so I could be of service to Him and to others. That was the shift. My life was no longer just about me. From this point on, every step I took would be guided by prayer. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of where God would lead me. Chapter 8, Making Things Right. Step 8 of AA says, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. By this point, I had learned one thing for certain. If I wanted to stay sober, I had to treat this program like my life depended on it, because it did. Half measures weren't going to cut it. I had spent too many years trying to do things my own way, and I knew where that had gotten me. Now it was time to face the wreckage I had left behind. I had already seen the patterns in my fourth step inventory. I knew the harm I had caused, but knowing it wasn't enough. Step 8 asked me to take responsibility, to write it all down, to become willing to make things right. At first, I hesitated. Some names were easy to put on the list. People I had lied to, stolen from, hurt in obvious ways. But others, some I wanted to justify, to blame, to leave off entirely. That's when I realized if I was holding back, I wasn't really surrendering. So I prayed again. I asked God to make me willing, because willingness wasn't something I could force. It had to come from Him. Slowly, I wrote down every name that came to mind. People I had hurt directly. People who had suffered because of my actions, even if I hadn't meant to hurt them. The hardest names to write were the ones where I knew I had no excuse, just selfishness, pride, or fear guiding my choices. By the time I was done, the list was longer than I wanted it to be. But this wasn't about what I wanted. This was about what God wanted. Step 8 wasn't about fixing everything overnight. It was about becoming willing to make amends, no matter how uncomfortable it would be. I treated this step like my life depended on it, because it did. Making amends, chapter 9. Step 9 of AA says, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Starting step 8 was a process in itself. I had spent a whole day praying about it, thinking about the people I had hurt and the amends I was going to make. The weight of it was heavy, but I knew I had to go through with it. I had to take personal responsibility. One of the first people I had to make amends to was my brother. For years, I had been stealing quarters from a porcelain boot he kept in his closet. Every time I needed a little extra cash, I'd take a few quarters, thinking nothing of it at the time. But as I looked at the situation from a new perspective, I realized it wasn't just the quarters I had taken. It was trust I had broken. I didn't know how he would respond. Maybe he'd be angry, or maybe he'd laugh it off. Either way, I knew I had to admit my wrong. When I went to him, I was nervous. I told him the truth, that I had been stealing from his boot, and that I felt terrible about it. I apologized, hoping he would understand. To my surprise, he didn't get angry. He didn't accuse me or tell me how wrong I was. He just said, "No big deal, bro. I know you've had a rough go of it." In that moment, I felt a deep sense of relief. The forgiveness I received wasn't just a gift. It was an understanding that he saw me as more than my mistakes. He saw the journey I had been on, and he understood that I was trying to make things right. I also learned something about myself that day. This wasn't just about making amends to others. It was about making peace with myself. The forgiveness I received from my brother was just the beginning. I had to forgive myself too. For both of us, that moment was a turning point, a moment where the past was acknowledged and the healing began. Step 9 wasn't always easy, but it was always necessary. The relationships I repaired didn't just restore trust. They brought a deeper understanding of myself and of the people I had hurt. Chapter 10, Continual Self-Examination. Step 10 of AA says, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. By the time I reached step 10, I had already learned how crucial self-awareness was to my recovery. But now, it wasn't just about reflecting on the past. Step 10 required a daily practice, a way of staying in check with myself in real time. I had already made huge changes through the earlier steps, but this step was about maintaining those changes. I had to keep asking myself, am I still on the right track? If I was wrong, I needed to admit it right away. One of the things I quickly realized about step 10 was that it wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. I was going to mess up, sometimes big time, sometimes in small ways. But the key was that I didn't have to wait until I hit rock bottom again to admit it. I could and should do it right away. Every night, I started to take a moment and reflect on my day. Where did I do well? Where did I fall short? Was there something I needed to make right? But it wasn't just about doing inventory at the end of the day. I had to be proactive in the moment. When I felt a wrong coming on, maybe a sharp word or a selfish thought, I needed to check myself. I had learned that the sooner I could admit my wrongs, the less damage they would do. Every day, I also began asking God to keep me from that drink. I had learned that resentment was the number one offender in my recovery. So I prayed to release any resentments I might be holding on to. It wasn't just about checking myself in the moment. It was about giving my day to God from the start, asking for His help in staying free from old habits. The sooner I admitted to my mistakes, the sooner I could move forward. And I didn't need to stew in guilt or regret. The process of admitting wrongs became part of my ongoing growth. Step 10 was about consistency. It was about getting it right all the time. It wasn't about getting it right all the time. It was about staying honest, staying humble, and staying in touch with the person I was becoming. This step showed me that my journey wasn't over after making amends. It was ongoing. It was about continuing to show up for myself and others day by day. Chapter 11, Seeking God's Will. Step 11 of AA says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. By this point in my journey, prayer had become essential. It wasn't just something I did when I was struggling. It became the foundation of my daily life. Every morning I asked God to keep me from that drink and to help me release resentment. But step 11 took things even deeper. Now I wasn't just praying for help. I was praying to know God's will. At first, this felt unfamiliar. I wasn't reading the Bible yet. I didn't have a clear idea of who God really was. But I knew He was there. I knew He was the one keeping me sober, guiding me through each day. And that was enough for me to trust Him. So I set aside time each day for prayer and meditation. I would pray for guidance and sit in silence, just listening. I didn't always hear anything obvious, but I could feel something shifting inside me. It was like I was learning to turn into a frequency I had ignored my whole life. I had spent years trying to control everything, but in step 11, I learned that real peace didn't come from control, it came from surrender. I didn't have to have all the answers. I just had to keep showing up, keep praying, and keep trusting that God was leading me. Even when I couldn't see where. I still had no idea where this road would take me. But one thing was certain, I wasn't walking it alone anymore. Passing it on, A New Freedom, Chapter 12. Chapter 12, Step 12 of AA says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. By the time I reached step 12, I understood something I hadn't before. This journey was never just about quitting drinking. It was about transformation, about learning how to live a new way, free from the chains that had bound me for so long. I wasn't perfect. I never would be. But I had come to embrace something far more powerful. Progress, not perfection. AA had given me tools to not only stay sober, but to handle life itself. Every day I had the choice to apply these principles, not just in recovery, but in everything. If I lived honestly, stayed humble, remained willing to make things right, and sought to help others, then I was living in step 12. The ninth step promises had spoken of a new freedom, and by this point, I was experiencing it. The weight of the past had been lifted. I no longer had to live in fear or regret. And the most incredible thing, this freedom kept growing. The more I gave it away, the more I shared my experience, my strength, and my hope, the more it became real in my own life. This was the spiritual awakening, not a single moment, but an unfolding revelation. Step 12 wasn't just about carrying the message to another alcoholic. It was about how I chose to live every single day. Was I living in the solution? Was I staying connected to God? Was I giving back what had so freely been given to me? I had once believed that surrender meant weakness, but I now knew the truth. Surrender was the key to freedom, and that freedom was just the beginning. Progress, not perfection, was the path. That was the promise. And that was where my real had finally begun. Moving on beyond step 12. Step 12 wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of something even greater. The program had given me a design for living, but now it was up to me to continue walking this path. Sobriety had started as something I desperately needed to survive, but now it was something I cherished. I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at truly living. I had spent so much time in the past trying to fix everything on my own, but through this process, I had learned something life-changing. Self-will had failed me. Surrender had saved me. The principles of AA were no longer just tools to keep me sober. They had become the foundation of how I approached everything. Relationships, challenges, even the way I saw myself. Living in the promises. The ninth step promises said, we will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. I used to think peace was something that only came when life was perfect, but now I understood. It had nothing to do with my circumstances and everything to do with my connection to God. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. I had once lived in fear of the future, but now I trusted that whatever happened, I wouldn't be facing it alone. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. I had tried everything in my power to fix my life. Nothing worked until I surrendered. The freedom I found was something I never could have created on my own. These weren't just words in a book. They were real, and I was living proof. more will be revealed. There was still so much I didn't know. I hadn't read the Bible yet. I didn't fully understand the depth of what God had planned for me. But what I did know was this: as long as I stayed close to Him, He would continue to reveal the next step. AA had given me the tools. Now God was guiding me somewhere even greater. I had no idea what was coming next. But I knew one thing for sure: I would never walk alone again. Chapter 13, Finding an Out. For years, I had been wrestling with the decision to leave. I had no plan, no real direction, just the overwhelming certainty that I couldn't stay. But still, I stayed until I found an out. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some carnival worker or stripper like I used to joke about. It was just someone who seemed interested in me, someone who filled my cups in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. For about 2 weeks, I had an affair. It wasn't love. It wasn't even about her. It was an escape, the push I needed to finally do what I had known deep down was inevitable. And so I sat Maddie and her mom down and told them I was leaving. I didn't disclose the truth. I couldn't. Instead, I kept it simple. I have to go. I wish I could say I handled it with honesty, with grace, with the principles I had learned in AA, but the truth is, I was still running. I was still trying to manage my own life on my own terms. And this decision, this exit, would come with consequences I couldn't see yet, because leaving wasn't freedom, not yet. I was about to learn that even outside of addiction, self-will still had the power to destroy me. Chapter 14, Trapped in a Cycle. I left my marriage, but I didn't find freedom. For years, I stayed in an on-again, off-again relationship with a woman I left my wife for. 12 times. 12 times I walked away. 12 times I went back. Every time my daughter watched, she didn't say much at first, but then, after yet another return, she finally spoke. Dad, that's all it took? I could hear the disappointment in her voice. She didn't have to say the rest, I already knew. But something kept pulling me back. Lust? Absolutely. But it was more than that. Deep down, I didn't think I was worth much. I had already failed my marriage, already let down people I loved, so maybe this cycle, this dysfunction, was just what I deserved. Seeing the pattern, at some point I started seeing a counselor at Mental Health Partners. I even went to group therapy. At first, it was just me venting about how I had finally left, only to go back over and over. I'd sit in that chair and explain what happened, and every time I convinced myself I had been wrong to leave, until one day my counselor stopped me. Why? She asked. Why do you keep going back? She wasn't accusing me. She wasn't judging. She just wanted me to look at it. And for the first time I did. I began to understand. I was worth more. I could set boundaries. I could hold them. And so I did. But by then, it was too late. A body that wouldn't obey around this time, the symptoms started. At first, it was little things, weakness, fatigue, stumbling. But then my left leg was just gone, dead weight. I had to physically grab my pant leg, and lift it just to get in and out of my car. And then I couldn't walk at all for nearly, it says here, nearly a year. For nearly a year, I was bedridden. Okay. Anytime I tried to stand, I fell. My body was failing me. I had spent years trapped in a cycle of self-destruction, but now I was physically trapped too. The man who once ran from everything, who could walk away from anything, couldn't even walk across the room. And that was only the beginning. Chapter 15. Nowhere to run. No, we're going to stop at chapter 14.